Adrian Cook joins me this week to discuss brewing with fresh, wet hops. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 235. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 235, and it's early May 2021. Adrian Cook joins me this week to discuss brewing with fresh, wet hops. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Every issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine is packed with articles for homebrewers and beer lovers. They offer access to videos, brewing courses, exclusive articles, and the amazing Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Go to beerandbrewing.com to get your subscription today. And also the Brew Commander, the new brewhouse controller from Blickman Engineering. It's available in electric and gas propane models. The patent-pending Brew Commander is a high-quality brewhouse controller that offers automated step mashing, boil timers, precision temperature control, and advanced settings. Command your brew day with the new Brew Commander. To order yours today, visit blickmanengineering.com. For more information, again, that's blickmanengineering.com. Finally, I wanted to introduce the web-based version of BeerSmith 3 coming in June. We'll be launching a full-featured web-based recipe editor that you can access from any web browser. This gives you access to your BeerSmith recipes from a laptop, desktop, or even mobile device by just logging into a web browser. The new BeerSmith Web will be available to any Gold Plus subscriber to BeerSmith 3, so all Gold members can access both traditional desktop program as well as a new web version for one low price. In addition, a desktop update will let you exchange profiles and ingredients with the new web version to make it easy to work across platforms. Check beersmith.com in June to learn more about BeerSmith for the web. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, I welcome Adrian Cook. Adrian is a longtime homebrewer, former chemistry teacher, and now works at Brew Lake Hops. Adrian, it's great to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very good. Thank you, Brad. It's really nice to meet you finally.
A pleasure having you as a first-time guest. How are things at Brew Lake Hops? I understand. Are you full-time there or part-time?
I'm not full-time. This is kind of a little bit of a side gig from my regular job.
Yeah.
And I basically got connected here in the last couple of months. They literally are right down the road from where I live. So it's been an interesting adventure finding out what he has. I've known about him since I've known about Brew Lake Hops since they first started. But it's just kind of getting behind the scenes and knowing more about the business now.
So tell us a little bit about Brew Lake Hops and what makes it unique.
What Brew Lake Hops does is it takes the fresh harvest hops and before they are dried or processed, takes them directly within the first 24 hours. And then we process them with our trademarked Brew Lake process. Basically, they are vacuum sealed, preserved, and then they are able to sit, and we've been running a long time study to see how they compare as far as their hop storage index. And they're comparing very well compared to traditional pelletized versions. So our hops are basically freeze packaged fresh hops, so you can open up and use them whenever you want.
So I got a package here that you sent me very kindly. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
They are, they're wet hops, which is an important concept, I guess, right? They're not dried. They're not pelletized. They're still wet.
Yeah, and that's the thing that when you look at, if you've ever seen the processing of hops, when they're drying them out, of course, they're using a lot of energy and driving off a lot of those volatile oils and exposing to oxygen. And then when they make the pellets, they're hammering them, and there's lupulin dust going everywhere, coating everything in the building. But with that, because they don't have any of that kind of processing, they're not being exposed to the heat and the oxygenation, the oxide reactions that are happening. And the whole flour basically is being preserved. So with that, you capture all of the fresh hop flavor aroma. When you first open up a bag of those Brew Lake hops, it literally just smells just like you picked it off from the vine. I even share that when I'm meeting with people, when I'm making beer and open them up, and it's like something they've never smelled before because most people haven't been exposed to fresh hops.
So they're whole wet hops, it appears anyways, and they're frozen, obviously, right?
Yep.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about the resurgence of hop growing in the Great Lakes region? I think you're up in Michigan, right?
Yeah, we're in West Michigan. Basically, what happened a number of years ago, and as like I said, or you said, I was a home brewer for a long time, but basically all of a sudden there was a big push for hop growing in Michigan. It was right at the time when you had the hop crisis that was happening out west and in Europe as well. So my understanding is a very large conglomerate put in some money into the state of Michigan to see if we were a viable hop growing region. Now, as far as hops in history, originally they started out on the East Coast in New York, New England area, and then as the industry grew, they continued moving westward. But then I think it was in the 1850s, there was aphids and powdery mildew. That was a problem that basically wiped out most of the crop. So Michigan at the time was a huge hop producer back then.
Yeah, I actually have a great grandfather or something like that, a couple greats anyways, and he was a hop grower in New York, central New York. So
yeah, and then once they basically shut down in the early 1900s, everything went to the Pacific Northwest. And of course, we know that they grow more hops than probably anywhere, just on the industrial scale. So with that hop crisis that happened, like I said, they looked at what can we do to grow hops in other areas. And Michigan is right on the 45th parallel, right in the middle of the hop growing region. Also with Lake Michigan, it provides a different type of microclimate all along the West Coast, so that we're actually able to provide a variety of different crops in this area. So we're comparable in a lot of ways to like California in that sense. In northern Michigan, in Traverse City, they actually grow award-winning grapes for white wines. Some of the largest hop fields that we have in Michigan are up in the Traverse City area as well, where they took an entire golf course, bought it, and then made it into a hop yard.
Wow. And how do you have any idea how much acreage there is in Michigan now, or how many hop growers are present now?
I don't know the actual number of acreage now. Basically what happened, there was a big hop boom when they did the push. And a lot of that was with Michigan State University for their extension office. And there were hop growers just kind of popping up all over the place. Since then, my biggest question was when that was happening, I'm like, everybody's growing hops, but who's processing them? And then what started happening was the number of growers started to be reduced and they were consolidating. So I know that the acreage overall is continuing to grow in the state. I just don't know the actual number.
And is it limited to Michigan? Are they growing in other Midwest states?
There is some growing down in Indiana, Illinois, in Wisconsin as well. But when you look at the actual hop yards that are located in the Midwest, a large focus of them go along Lake Michigan, all the way from the bottom toward the Chicago area up to Traverse City, which is in the very top of the Lower Peninsula.
Now, I understand you have an interesting story to tell about the founder of Blue Lake Hops, who kind of got this whole process started.
Sure. So Jim Schlichting, he actually started out in radio. He was a producer. So he got to the point where he was ready to retire, him and his wife. And what they did was they have a piece of property out basically in the national forest that's here. A piece of property came up available right next door to him. So it was right in the middle of the hop growing boom in Michigan. So he bought that acreage and decided to plant hops. That placed him on the council with the hop growers in Michigan as well. And as he was continuing to grow hops and getting familiar with the industry, he basically was seeing, we're trying to compete with the Pacific Northwest with their pellets. We need to find something different, something unique, so that, you can't take the Michigan hops necessarily and compare them to the Pacific Northwest hops. Parallel to that, the MSU Extension Office here, they also were doing some research and development, and we do have some Michigan specific varieties of hops now. But basically, they found that the terroir is pretty important here. One of the ones that they were studying was the Michigan Chinook hops. So Pacific Northwest Chinook, very piney, resiny. The Michigan ones are more tropical.
Interesting. So there's a big difference between the hops grown in Michigan. I mean, same varieties, I assume. Grown in
Exactly,
Michigan,
yep.
then grown in the Northwest then.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Blue Lake Hops that we're trying to focus on is looking at the individual growers and their actual area and how the terroir is affected by that. So kind of treating it like we do for grapes for vintners. It's a huge impact on the hops.
And what varieties are being grown, or which ones are you working with? I guess probably a better question.
We have basically what we're doing is when he first started off, we only had a couple of different varieties. He started in 2014. And then in 2019, he offered two varieties, which if you think of the timing on that,
okay.
Where we had Cascade hops, as well as, shoot, I'm forgetting the name of the other one. Give me just a second. But the Cascade was a big variety, of course, that people use. The other variety is Crystal, sorry. So those two varieties are kind of the start of having enough for commercial production.
Okay.
And then you have COVID-19 hits, which really slowed down a lot of things for everybody. And he did move forward with the 2020 harvest, where we have Indiana Chinook now as well. We have a Michigan Raku, Michigan Copper, Michigan Mackinac. Copper and Mackinac are both trademark hops in Michigan. And then also a small supply of Sriracha Ace.
So I was looking at my box here. I've got Michigan Copper, which I'm not even familiar with. It happens to be the one that you sent me. How would that compare to some hops that are perhaps better known?
It does have a lot of the floral tropical flavors that you get. One of the things that's kind of unique to it is it has sort of a cherry flavor is the descriptor that they throw in there.
Oh, really?
And what's kind of cool about Michigan, we're one of the largest cherry growers in the world. We grow maraschino, it's not maraschino cherries. That's it's going to elude me right now. But it does have a very unique taste to it. So it's really good in like of course, your IPAs. I've had several IPAs and New England IPA varieties that are made with it. So just a lot of tropical flavors that are with it, and then followed with that kind of unique cherry end.
Well, part of the goal is to address some of the flavor and freshness that's lost during traditional hop process. How did you guys go about developing the particular process that you use?
Specifically, it was working with a Michigan State University. They have a product innovation center, and that's where they started doing the original research and design and how to commercially package it. So we use a facility. It's a FDA facility in the Metro Detroit area. And Jim was able to purchase commercial systems to be able to do the packaging so that we can go to any grower on the day of harvest, collect their hops, then we drive them in a refrigerated truck to Detroit, and they are flash frozen within 24 hours of being picked.
That's pretty cool. So you've got, I assume it looks like you're vacuum sealing them as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. They're vacuum sealed. I believe it's a 4 mil plastic that's on them. And then they are frozen within minutes, is my understanding. It's something like negative 37 degrees Celsius or something crazy like that they do the initial freezing.
Wow. And then, of course, you store them frozen in your fridge. Is there any, how do they hold up shelf life wise?
I have an ongoing study. Traditional dry hops, they say 3 years is what you expect. Mm-hmm. And we are comparable, maybe even better. What's a little bit more difficult is because when they pelletize the hops, they basically homogenize them when they grind them up. So their samples are going to, compared to fresh hops, kind of depends on which sample core you get. So you get a little bit of variety, but all the numbers seem to be pretty much in line as far as storage, which is pretty promising.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say the hops that I'm still using 2019 hops, and as soon as I open up a bag, it literally smells just like I picked them.
So do you see more variation with the wet hops than you would perhaps with the pelletized hops because they aren't going through this process?
I think that there's potentially more variation for sure, just because of the nature of, you're talking about individual plants. You could have this plant right here had a little bit more water compared to the one that was 10 feet away, which is kind of the, I guess the mystique as far as growing hops and the variety there with them. As far as like my experience though in using them, it's been very consistent. Just because you are using that larger volume.
And how does a product compare to fresh wet hops? I mean, obviously, at harvest time there is some availability if you have contact with a grower to try and get fresh wet hops, but generally those have to be used within a day or two of picking, or just a couple of days of picking. So they're shipped overnight to the brewery, and I know several breweries actually make beers with wet hops. How does your product compare to that?
It's the same. You just don't have the time constraint. And that's what's really cool about it. I have seen myself as well, going into a brewery, they're going to do a harvest beer. Their production schedule was off. And then there's huge sacks of hops that are just sitting there getting moldy. Because it is a natural product, hops do spoil very quickly, which is why when you have a fresh harvest ale, that the pickers and the brewers have to coordinate their timing, which affects your production schedule in that sense. With this, it kind of helps eliminate that, but it's still the same wet hop product that they would have gotten. It just doesn't have to, mess with their schedule, so to speak.
And for those of you, those people who are not really familiar with working with wet hops, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of working with wet hops versus pelletized hops? Sure.
So one of the big differences between wet hops and dry hops is there are a lot of aroma compounds that are still present. Usually you describe things that are kind of a grassy sense. Mm-hmm. So that as soon as you dry it, that is gone. So you're able to capture some of that, but when you're in the boil, you are going to lose some of those compounds as well. The other difference is that there are other compounds that potentially, because of the drying process, are being oxidized and going straight up into the atmosphere, and they're gone. You would never know. So it does make it unique because they never actually leave. They're still wet when we freeze them, and then when you throw them into your boil, those compounds are still there. Now, naturally, the longer the hops are in the boil, the fewer aroma compounds are going to be there. So if you use them more towards the end of the boil or in the whirlpool, you can capture some more of that unique esters that are there.
So you mentioned I've heard this before, vegetal or lawn, you get some of these more vegetal flavors, I guess, off of fresh wet hops than probably dry hops, right?
Yeah, you certainly can.
But on the other hand, you also get the fresh aromas. Which is great.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's a mix, right?
Yeah. And I think the main thing to take away is it's something different. It's unique. And for home brewers or craft brewers, you have this whole palette of different things to select. And now this is just another option, something that is different in that regard. It's kind of on the other end of the extreme is processing to the point where you're only extracting the oils themselves or doing some sort of steam distillation, really concentrating those couple of compounds that we know, the alpha acids and the oils that we really want.
CO2 extracts would probably be a good example of that, right? Where you basically just have alpha acid and not much else, right?
Exactly. Right. And do they make good beers? Absolutely they do. Is it the same product? No. So it's just adding another piece that we can use in our palette of ingredients.
Now, I know one of the challenges working with wet hops is trying to figure out exactly how much to use, because obviously an ounce of wet hops has a lot of water in it that the dry hops simply don't. So what's the rough conversion to try and figure out what the appropriate amount of hops to use is?
Absolutely. And I think that's the hardest part too for even brewers in doing the fresh harvest is it's going right from the grower to the brewery. You don't know what kind of moisture content is in there. So when you look online, you look at the resources, you'll see all sorts of different numbers. 1 to 5 typically sticks out, 1 to 6, as far down to like 1 to 4, 1 to 3. The difference for us is that we are able to, when we take our hops in to be processed, they measure the alpha acid and the moisture content just like they do for dry hops. And then they do a sample where they dry it down to figure out exactly what it would be as if it was a dry hop, which typically you dry to 10% or down to 8% moisture level. So the key that I've actually been working on here since I joined Blue Lake Hops was figuring out, well, how much do you actually need? We had some anecdotal evidence where people were basically saying, well, I use 1 to 4. Other people would be like, oh, I used 1 to 5, but it was way too much, way more than I expected. It depends on the individual hop, the variety, and the moisture content. We have some hops that their moisture content was upwards of like 80%. We had some others that were, quite a bit lower. I want to say it was something like 40% off the top of my head. So that's going to affect how you use it. And for a brewer, of course, they want to figure out, how do I estimate my IBUs? How is this going to compare when I'm actually putting this in compared to like the dry pellets?
Of course.
So that's where I'm trying to provide that data to the brewers. And I'll also be including that on the website. It's not there quite yet. But I can say for the, let's say I sent you the copper, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I've got copper, correct.
The copper is about, let's see. It's
So
1 to 4.7.
Ah, excellent. So I can.
So, for that one, if as a brewer, would you use 1 to 4 or 1 to 5? But then we have another variety of hops that it was so dry, so to speak, that it's 1 to 1.6. So that's a huge difference in terms of figuring out your IBUs.
Yeah, because if I put 5 or 6 times as much as I normally would, I would kill the beer probably, right?
Exactly. And then again, too, those fresh compounds, I mean, you're not going to know the IBUs unless you actually like send it into a lab. So it's all kind of sensory in that sense. But at least to be able to predict ballpark of what you can expect, that's another advantage to doing the Blue Lake process that you don't have when you just get sacks of hops that are coming in from the grower.
And you mentioned you don't have that data yet, but I assume at some point you're going to have that data probably by lot, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, so I do have the data for all of our individual things that we offer right now.
Okay.
I just need to go in and update the website as far as recommendations for people. And I've been also talking to small breweries and some of the medium-sized breweries and home brewers of, this is what the product, you're getting this is about how much you should use. And of course, there's kind of the cooking sense of like, well, if it's supposed to be, 1 to 3.48, then I'm just going to use 1 to 4. Just kind of the nature of the home brewer mentality, if you will. But as you get bigger, of course, you have to be much more cognizant of those numbers.
And what's the best place to use the hops? I mean, is it better to use them in the boil? Is it best to use the fresh wet hops in the whirlpool? What about dry hopping?
So as far as using them in the boil, I think you lose a lot of the aroma characters. For that matter, you're getting more of the bitterness. But there are lots of studies that are out there, if you will, where even the bitterness hops that you use do contribute some flavor characteristics to the overall end beer. So you could use Blue Lake hops all the way through the entire batch. You could make a smash beer with them to really focus on what the difference is. I think that the biggest advantage is using more in the whirlpool end of things so that you can really, trap some of that fresh aroma that you can get from the process that we have.
And what about dry hopping? Can you use them for dry hops or not?
You can. We recommend that it's used on the hot side, on the boil side. The reason for that, if you think, this is literally just the hops coming right off from the vine and going right into a bag in the freezer. So they aren't, if they could have some other foreign material in there potentially. Whereas when you are heating them and processing them, that might drive some other things out. So in that sense, we recommend using on the hot side.
Okay.
But people are using them on the dry side. It's just kind of that walking that line with like what's the FDA and what's allowed kind of a thing. We also have people that have made hop teas with them. We've had hop ciders that have been done. We also have hop cider, hop tea. I think there was a hop seltzer out there.
Somebody's got to do the mead too, right?
Yeah. Say that again. I'm sorry.
So somebody has to do mead as well, right?
Yeah, that's just a matter of time. I have a batch of mead I need to start up here soon too, and I might have to use some of these varieties I haven't touched before. I love dry hop ciders. I kind of have some go-to recipes that I do for that, and I'm waiting to do the same with a mead.
Well, how's the feedback been so far from homebrewers? I mean, how long have you been doing this too? I'm not personally familiar with the brand, but
So 2014 was when he first started doing the research.
okay.
2019 was the first release. So as far as COVID happening, this is basically year one all over again in that sense.
Yeah.
So it's a new product, and we're basically just trying to get the word out, get it advertising that is out there. We're trying to get people to try the hops out and to use them, and to get their feedback. The feedback that we've been getting it's all been very positive. I think it's very common. It's like that people will say, well, that's not what I was expecting. It was really good, but it wasn't quite what I was expecting. And is that because they've never made a harvest type ale they haven't used with fresh hops? Some of the other feedback that we've gotten is involving in the size of the packaging. So for a home brewer, 2.2 pound brick of frozen hops is a bit much to work with.
Yeah, I guess we should mention the average the package unit you work with, I guess, is a kilogram, right? So each
That's right.
That's kind of the minimum order size is a kilogram, which, as you point out, is a little bit much for a 5-gallon batch.
Yeah, and that's actually why we're looking at making more of like a 6-ounce type package, which would be better for home brewers. Whereas the 1 kilogram gives a lot of flexibility for larger commercial brewers or mid-sized brewers. Yeah, I have found with the hops in particular, I will thaw them out, break them apart into smaller units, and then I have a vacuum sealer as well, and I just vacuum seal them, throw them back in my freezer. Works really well in that regard.
Yeah, so walk us through the process. If I want to use this. If I want to use these, how do I do it? Do I start the day before to thaw them out, or what?
It actually doesn't take that long to thaw,
Okay.
just because there's not that much moisture in there. So it's not like thawing out a side of beef or something like that. So what I do is I just take a 5-gallon bucket, fill it up maybe halfway with some water, and I just throw the whole brick in. And when I'm doing that, that's when I start doing my grind. Get my boil going, and then by the time my mash is done, those hops are thawed out, and I can portion them out how I'm going to use them in my boil.
And again, I mean, you're using quite a bit more than you might normally too, right? I mean, potentially 3-5 times as much. So that's
exactly.
It's quite a bit hops, really, right?
And that's part of the planning that people have to be aware of. One thing that's different when you have whole hops versus pellet, of course. The pellet are ground up so they don't take up as much volume, it seems, in the wort, but they absorb water. If you use whole hops that are dried, they also will absorb a lot of the water. So you have a little bit of drop, if you will. So
true, right?
Yeah. But then with these, because they already have that moisture in there, they're not absorbing the beer in that sense. They're not absorbing water out of your wort. So it is literally just the volume of the hops. So when I've used these before, I have on my personal system, I have a false bottom. So I'm able to just throw them in whole. My false bottom catches it, and it's able to help filter out the trub, which is beneficial. Whereas when you have the pelletized hops, of course, they're just going right through everything. Also, people use the large like nylon sacks. Or if you have something like, to side advertise, the Anvil brewing system, using your grain basket. As soon as you're done with your mash, dump out your grains, rinse that out real quick, and then you can use that for your whole hops.
Right. I assume you're talking about the the sort of desktop option, right? The Anvil system. He's got several different systems, obviously.
What I've used is the 5-gallon system. So it... Unfortunately, I've also experienced where I didn't use the basket and the whole hops plug up the out port. So you're right, your wort's all cooled off and ready to drain off, and you open up the valve and nothing comes out. So
maybe a grain bag for an average home brewer, right?
Yeah, yep, definitely a grain bag or a false bottom. Again, it kind of depends on the size of your system.
And as you mentioned, you're mostly using it in the whirlpool, so really just kind of the end of the boil is when you're adding them, right?
Which, and that's kind of the trend right now, of course, with your New England IPAs. To have a lot of hops right at the very end.
Would it be okay to use it as dry hop for maybe a home brewer? I know you said there's issues with professional brewers and you got to worry about the FDA and everything, but obviously we don't have to do that at home.
Sure. People have done it. That's all I'll say. They've done it. They come out good. It is wet when you first put them in there. Again, because it's not processed, you're getting a lot more of those more delicate compounds that come out into your solution. The ciders that people have done have turned out fantastic. You're not boiling your cider before you put them in. But because it's already had that chance to ferment, you do have the preserving quality of the alcohol that's in there too.
And you're basically in your second season. Can you go over again what varieties you have? And are they all local to Michigan too, by the way?
They're mostly Michigan. We do have Indiana Chinook that is available. Right. Otherwise, because of our location, we've been focusing on Michigan hops and the fact that there's a lot of research for Michigan hops through MSU, so we have a great connection there. But this is the kind of process that potentially we could do anywhere. So it's more connecting with the individual growers to be able to process the hops in our fashion and then make them available for brewers so that they could make a fresh, wet hopped ale any time of the year. As far as our varieties, though, we have the Cascade and the Crystal from 2019 still. And then the Chinook are coming from Indiana, and we also have Michigan Chinook. And then there's the Michigan Copper and the Alpha Aroma Raku varieties, which are a high alpha hop.
Are you tied at all into some of the brew local efforts going on? Across the country, we're seeing more and more breweries start to try and source their ingredients locally.
Absolutely. And that is a big thing in Michigan too. So the hop industry was hopping, in Michigan to try and get local hops. And now the barley industry is starting to catch up as well and offer some of those same type of locally sourced varieties.
Yeah, I've had a number of craft maltsters on at various times on the podcast, and they, like you said, same thing. It's part of this brew local movement.
For an example, Founders and Bells are obviously in our backyard, and they do have harvest ales that are using Michigan-grown hops. The Cascade hops that we have, if I'm understanding my information correctly, is actually the same hops that were used for Founders for their fresh hopped ale that they did in 2019. And I'm going to do an experiment comparing our Cascade hops. We have our Blue Lake process. We also have from the exact same field hops that were pelletized, so that we can do a blind triangle tasting to get people's feedback on how they perceive the differences between them.
I skipped over it. I apologize, but can you talk a little bit more about Michigan State and the role they played in putting this all together, and also their relationship in helping you now?
Sure. This is something that Jim, the owner of the company, has been working closely with them with their innovation lab. They have a Dr. Rob Serene that he was working with specifically in developing the process. And it's really working with that lab of doing the R&D to figure out what do we have to do? How do we do this process so that we can preserve the hops because they are delicate and they easily spoil. So that was the part working with Michigan State in developing that system. At this point, Michigan State is their extension office is continuing looking into the Michigan as a hop growing region. And they actually just recently released their own podcast specifically for hop growers in Michigan.
Oh, cool.
I just listened to episode number 3. I think they're only on like 5 episodes so far. So that all just happened as well.
That's really cool. Well, finally, can you give us a little bit of advice for homebrewers? So if I'm a homebrewer and I am interested in making a harvest ale, for example, how would I go about doing it?
So like I said, for this larger package that we have to thaw it out first in like a 5-gallon bucket, you can do that during your mash. It does not take that long to thaw out. And you can still break it apart potentially with your hands. I would say first, when you first open up that package and it's thawed, take a big whiff of it just so you can smell like what really fresh hops smell like. plan on the fact that it is a whole hop, so you have to have some sort of way to contain them so that they're not getting stuck in any of your plumbing, so to speak. Be it that you're using a false bottom, a basket, a bag. If you have a spider, it has to be a pretty decent sized spider to do that. So just planning on that volume. And then just as myself as a home brewer, I would certainly recommend using at the whirlpool, using at the end, to really get as much of that the delicate aromas type out. But you do definitely get a different kind of a character when you use that hop all the way through. So be creative, use it in any different way that you want, and see what you can produce. And we want to hear back from the home brewers and see what their experiences are. Part of that, the package size, that was a reference from Homebrewers as well. We also, when we ship them, we do ship them in, I don't know if you got, Brad, that great big styrofoam cooler and a reusable ice pack. Great for reusing. So that's kind of a nice little bonus when you do get them.
Well, where can they find your hops? I haven't mentioned your website yet, so I'll let you do.
Yeah, so if you go to bluelakehops.com, on the website, you'll see there's a shop button on there. We have data for all the individual hops from their harvest. Also, on the individual box, Brad, you'll see there's a latitude and longitude on there somewhere.
I did see that.
That's the latitude and longitude of the hop field that those hops came from.
Really cool.
So you can really know the source of your ingredients. So I'm working with the website to try and get some more information up there, but really, I mean, go to check it out, bluelakehops.com. Try out the hops, give us some feedback. We're really wanting to know what people think so that we can, expand this as another option for people to use in the golden era of craft brewing that we're in right now.
And Adrian, your closing thoughts on working with fresh wet hops?
Don't be afraid of them. Just it's kind of going back to basics. It's using a very fresh, unprocessed product. Don't be afraid of them. I know a lot of people, and myself included, making the switch to like all grain is very intimidating because you're not sure at first. Just dive right in, give it a try. It's easy to work with, and you're going to get a very different beer than what you normally would make with dry hops, and just relish in the fact that, you have a very fresh product, and especially knowing the location of where your ingredients are coming from. That's fantastic. It helps the smaller growers all over.
I mean, just set expectations when you say that, and I've had some harvest beers before. They are very different. What are some of the characteristics of a beer made from fresh wet hops that are different from the beer that you might get, from your local pub?
Yeah, I think that that kind of the earthiness, the grassiness, the fresh mowed grass type of a idea. It's not exactly the same as like you just go out and mow your lawn. Mm-hmm. But there is something similar to that. There is that vegetal type of experience. So it tends not to be as crisp of a hop flavor. It's more of a, I would say, floral type of experience comparatively. And I think that some people are turned off by like extreme bitterness. I mean, the bitterness wars of the 90s. This is on the other extreme where it's really the floral type characters that shine.
Interesting. So, you might want to pick, have you got any idea what styles work best with it?
Well, harvest ales, of course. Most of my beers I've used are pale ales. So it's more focusing on the hop character. I really like that sessionable, crushable type of ale. I've used them in brown ales as well.
Yeah, I keep thinking of a lot of the English styles because they're kind of a little bit messy to start with, right, in terms of overall flavors and so on.
Yeah, and they just kind of blend in. And when you're using the English style yeast and getting more ester production from them, they really complement each other well. It's not going to be the sharp type bitterness that you experience with like your West Coast IPAs. But as far as your like New England IPAs, that adds a different layer to it as far as the more of that floral character.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to giving it a try myself. I've had some harvest ales. I haven't actually made one, so this will be fun.
Well, and it's so hard to do because you have to have somebody that's growing them nearby to be even able to try it.
Yeah, especially for homebrew, it's just very almost, well, at least in the past, it was almost impractical. I think there was one. I knew of one company that was shipping fresh hops. You could like schedule a date, 3 months from now or something like that, and try and book your hops. But not really practical for the homebrewer. So I'm hoping I'm hoping you guys are successful and this works out well.
Yeah, for myself, honestly, my venture into wet hopped beers, harvest beers, I have 6 plants out in front of my house, and it's hit or miss, depends on the year if I get enough. So I was drying them out and freezing them myself, so I could accumulate enough. Or if I had a really good harvest year, I would be able to make a fresh hop beer that day, kind of a thing. But yeah, it's something that's really not anywhere available, and now you don't have that limitation of waiting for the harvest in the fall, or on the commercial scale, you don't have the limitation of changing your brewing schedule, or you can even extend your harvest ale production, so that it's not just a one and done offering. You could offer it for several months or year round potentially.
Well, Adrian, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about Blue Lake hops. I wish you guys great success.
I appreciate it. It was really nice to meet you, Brad, and to have a chance to talk to you. I've been looking forward to it.
And my guest today was Adrian Cook. Adrian is a longtime homebrewer and, of course, works at Blue Lake Hops. Thanks again, Adrian.
Thanks, Brad.
A big thank you to Adrian Cook for joining me this week. Thanks also to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They offer access to videos, brewing courses, exclusive articles, and the Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Go to beerandbrewing.com to get your subscription today. And also the Brew Commander, the new brewhouse controller from Blickman Engineering. It's available in electric and gas propane models. The patent-pending Brew Commander is a high-quality brewhouse controller that offers automated step mashing, boil timers, precision temperature control, and advanced settings. Command your brew day with the new Brew Commander. To order yours today, go to blickmanengineering.com. And finally, I want to introduce the new web-based version of BeerSmith 3, which is coming in June. We'll be launching a full-featured web-based recipe editor that you can access from any web browser. This gives you access to your BeerSmith recipes from a laptop, desktop, or even mobile device by just logging into a web browser. The new BeerSmith Web will be available to any Gold Plus subscriber and work with the traditional BeerSmith desktop program. Check beersmith.com in June to learn more about the new BeerSmith for the web. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a great brewing week.